Okay, my next question for Dr. Paul involves the concept of $1 trillion, and this is being recorded outside of the interview because Dr. Paul had limited time and I didn't want to waste it on this explanation. But it involves a concept that many of us don't really fully appreciate, and I wanted to take a moment here to expand on that, and that is the concept of $1 trillion. It's a number that really is outside the frame of reference for most all of us, and we of course hear this term bantered around, especially when it comes to finances at a national scale. So I'd like to give you a few examples to help you develop a deeper appreciation of what that really means. Let's start with the $1,000 bill, and if you had a $1,000 bill, you can really appreciate what you can do with that. You can have a really good night out on the town with your friends and family, and you know what that can purchase you. Now, if you had a stack of those $1,000 bills and for 4 inches high, that would be $1 million. So 4 inches of $1,000 bills is $1 million, and I think most of us can appreciate what $1 million is, and may actually accumulate that in our lifetime. Many people are able to do that, and there's a large number of people who actually earn that amount of income on an annual basis. Now, let's go to the next level, 1,000 times more, which is a billion. And there's probably less than 1,000 billionaires in the world, maybe 400 or 500 in the United States alone. And if you had a stack of those same $1,000 bills, it would be 358 feet tall, which is pretty significantly high and a lot higher than the 4 inches stack of $1 million bills, for $1 million and $1,000 bills. So let's go to the next level, which is $1 trillion, and which is 1,000 billion or a million million. So if you had that same stack of $1,000 bills and stacked them one on top of the other, not end to end, but just one on top of the other, so it would be a visible stack, thick, it would be nearly 68 miles high, 68 miles high, which is just a staggering amount of bills. So you can begin to appreciate from this analogy how much a trillion is. Now, for those of you who may not grasp that, I'd like perhaps a simpler way would be to get our heads around this is if we use a time analogy. So if we certainly all know what a second is, and if we have 1 million seconds, that's going to be about 11 and a half days. If we jump that up to 1,000-fold and have 1 billion seconds, that would be 32 years. And if we extend that the next level, or 1 trillion seconds, that's going to be 32,000 years. So 1 million seconds, 11 and a half days, but 1 trillion seconds is 32,000 years. So these are staggering numbers, especially and I guess this helps put a frame of reference around it so that you can begin to understand when the United States has a $1.6 trillion deficit for this year and cumulatively close to $15 trillion recognized and unfunded liabilities perhaps close to $100 trillion. The enormous amount of income that we are talking about, it is just staggering, absolutely staggering. So that's part of the reasons why we're getting into so many problems with the economy. But I thank you for listening to this explanation, and I think it will help you better appreciate my next question with Dr. Paul.
In light of the fact that the elections are coming up and the economy is going to be such a massively important issue, I mean, we're looking at I think a $1.6 trillion deficit for this year, and that combined with the total deficit of $14 trillion and probably unfunded liabilities that are well above $60 or $70 trillion. And President Obama saying that we can't simply cut our way to prosperity. We certainly can't spend our way. So how would you suggest that Americans get comfortable with the idea of smaller government? I mean, is there a process or a approach that you would recommend? Because it seems to be such a central part, an integral to the solution to the problem.
It's so difficult because people, the majority of the people, obviously for the last quite a few decades, have sort of looked to the government and depended on the government, and the wealth was there. But now we've consumed the wealth, we've destroyed the jobs, and all we have is debt. You could do this by, if we elected the right people to Congress and they could work out a transition program and wean ourselves off and not have any major calamity. But I think the odds of that happening are about slim to none because the politicians won't cut anything. There's a strong lobby for the military-industrial complex and foreign adventurism. There's a strong lobby that says the entitlement system is perfect. But that doesn't leave me as a pessimist because I think what's happening is more and more people are realizing they can't fulfill their promises. The system doesn't work. So you could introduce the notion of nullification and say if the states have determined that the federal government can't take care of us, whether it's through Obamacare and they want to opt out of the system or anything that the government does, if the monetary crisis moves to the point where the money is not doing the job and you get a check but it doesn't buy anything, it means that people will opt out of the system. It won't be, actually opting out by law, but it'll be a de facto nullification. People will just ignore it, ignore what the government does. Maybe they'll get to the point where, take the marijuana issue. They might have 5 million people smoking marijuana in California, and up until now it was always the federal government had to go in and put all these people behind bars because the world would become thin if we didn't have everybody in a prison. But maybe it'll get to the point where the system will break down, and maybe we won't have these armed bureaucrats coming in and raiding raw milk producers. But that's a little scary because then there's the big decision on what is civil disobedience, what isn't, and are they going to ignore us or are they going to continue to make examples of us? And I think that's what they do with the raw milk issue, is they want to show you they're still in charge, but eventually they're not going to be in charge because they're not going to have any money, and hopefully we can turn that around and make that a positive.
Yes, indeed. And Leslie, if you could comment on the Patriot Act, which really has to be one of the most inappropriately named bills we've ever had, because a patriot, of course, is defined by the dictionary as a person who regards himself as a defender of individual rights against presumed interference by the federal government. And recently in Chicago and Minneapolis, there were some prominent peace activists who had their doors broken down and property confiscated without any charges being filed. Evidently, patriots are now considered terrorists and are being terrorized by the so-called Patriot Act. So I'm wondering what it's going to take for Americans to wake up and see what the federal government has become as an out-of-control spending unconstitutional laws and loss of liberty.
Unfortunately, I'm afraid we're getting closer to that all the time, and the transition is not going to be available to us. But, at the time of our founding of our country, the patriots were the ones who said they had too much of the government, and they were going to challenge the government. So today, if you're a patriot, you support all the wars and all the welfare, and you support the Patriot Act, which undermines or destroys the Fourth Amendment, so they've turned the definition of patriot on its head. But the Patriot Act actually, it was passed right after 9/11. I asked a member when we were getting ready to vote for it, I said, we've only had a couple hours on this, and there's some bad stuff in it. And the member said, well, yeah, I know about it, but how can you vote against the Patriot Act, under these conditions? And but I said, if this bill had been named not the Patriot Act, but a bill to repeal the Fourth Amendment, how many people would have voted for it?
Yeah.
And that's essentially what it does. So it allows the government to do what they're doing, and some of this authority is continuing to grow. And certainly at the airports, they don't have the right to do what they do to all the potential customers. The passengers aren't suspects. They're not. There's no probable cause there, and yet they're being humiliated and groped and X-rayed continuously. So but the Patriot Act is something that if we see a transition back toward a free society, the Patriot Act will be repealed. But right now, we couldn't even slow it up. In Washington, they've just renewed it, essentially the whole thing for 4 more years.
Yeah, it's sad. But just out of personal curiosity, there was an article in Time magazine today that suggested you were calling for the federal government to sell all its gold reserves. And I know you're a really strong supporter of gold as a counter to the devaluation of the dollar. And I'm wondering if that is Is that something you were in favor of, or is just a position to get the Fed to audit their gold reserves?
Well, it was a mixture of things because when they were threatening all kinds of things, a disaster in the world, if we didn't raise the debt limit, I would say, well, when people are in trouble, if you or I got into trouble and we had a stash of gold, and if we wanted to be honorable, don't you think we would sell our gold and pay our bills and maybe go to work and buy the gold coins back again?
Sure.
So it was sort of that idea. But I'm not necessarily against the gold being put back into the hands of the people. And it was also part of this idea of the audit. If we're going to sell the gold, they would have to find out if we really have the gold.
Sure.
Of course, I've had this recent hearing to look into how much gold is really there. So it was all part of that. But I don't think it would be the end of the world if the gold was all put in the hands of the people because it was confiscated. But, if you were going to deliver it to the people, you could make it all into coins and let people use it as legal tender. That's what the government was supposed to do. They weren't supposed to hold all the gold. They were just supposed to guarantee that when they minted the gold coins, that it would have an honest weight and measure. So it was part of that argument.
No, excellent. Well, thank you for expanding on that, and thank you for all you do and really taking up the torch and seeking to preserve the limited liberties we have now, and seeking to expand that. So I really am strongly in favor of what you're doing, and really want to congratulate you and wish you the best in your upcoming campaign.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me on.
All right, thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.